I like doing these little car talks because I have a choice when I'm driving. I can listen to music that I've listened to over and over and over again, or maybe discover a new artist, or I can listen to the news and just get more and more angry, or I can do a live video and just kind of get things off my chest and talk about things. I don't really do a blog anymore, so I like to have these little sort of live chats while I'm in my car driving, and it seems to kind of be a good way to express opinions about things without using words, because Facebook is notoriously stupid for misunderstanding what people say in words. And so the other good thing about doing a video as I'm driving is that it forces me to keep it no longer than the length of my trip, which in this case might be about 10 minutes. So I wanted to talk about violence, and I wanted to talk about how I just don't think a lot of people that are out there protesting right now, the ones that are getting violent, I don't think they understand what it is that they're leading to and what they're trying to get to. And so I want to preface the video on two statements. First of all, I abhor violence. I hate it. I don't condone it, except in self-defense of violence. That's it. The only time that I think there's a such thing as a legitimate use of violence is in defense of violence. In other words, offensive violence is never a good idea, because what it results in is defensive violence, which creates retaliatory violence, and next thing you know, you're in this constant loop. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I've been violent, and I've had to be in a position where I've had to kill people in combat, and I've seen the destruction that violence causes. I've seen what chaos causes. I've seen what happens when a peaceful protest becomes just a self-destructive massacre. And of course, these are in foreign lands. But I look at what's happening here in the United States, and I just don't think people quite understand what they're getting themselves into when they go down this road of destruction. And I understand it. I understand the frustration. I understand the anger. I understand where people are, because I also understand what the root cause is. Now, there are too many out there that think the root cause is capitalism, right? And a lot of these people, they're not fighting against police abuse. They're not fighting against this excessive force. They're not fighting for justice for the killer of George Floyd. They're fighting against capitalism. And the best system that's been out there is democracy and capitalism. That's what they're fighting against. And so the idea is just the destruction. But what's going to happen is government has caused everything that we're seeing right now. Look at what led up to these protests right now. People were already frustrated and desperate because millions of people have lost their jobs. Millions. The government right now is actually praising the fact that less than 3 million people signed up for unemployment benefits in the last month. Oh, wow. Look, we're under 3 million people applying for unemployment. And the government is actually celebrating this as some sort of progress. So they created, it's like sticking a knife in your back 9 inches, pulling it out 3 inches, going, look, see how I'm helping you? That's what government has done. And they've created these crises that we're in right now. And they created that desperation with all of their heavy-handed coronavirus responses, with their education system that has manipulated people to believe that anything that government does is for our benefit, and that we should just blindly trust these people. Oh, that person's a doctor. Never mind, the person works for the government as a doctor. And then we have the killing of, the murder of George Floyd on the tail end of this COVID nonsense. And it's because of government. Who killed George Floyd? Government did. Who kills people in this country every single day who are unarmed? The government does. And so there's a lot of anger about that. But when people go out and they start, and it's actually a nonpartisan anger, at least that's how it started out. It started out as a nonpartisan anger. People on the left are angry, people on the right are angry, people in the middle are angry, people who don't identify with any particular political philosophy are angry. Everyone is angry, and justifiably so. However, what's happening is these righteous protests that have gone out there, and I would say when these protests initiated against the Minneapolis police, it was righteous. When that was the source of their anger, the target of their anger was the source of their frustration. What the heck is going on here? Why is that car facing the wrong direction? When the target of their anger is the source of their frustration, which is the government and the police, that's righteous, that's great. But when you turn that on the people who could support you, and you start destroying people's livelihoods, and keep in mind too, a lot of this is because of these so-called Antifa, anti-capitalist, communist type people. These are the people that they go out there and they stick their fists in the air and they talk about down with the system, and they call people Nazis and all that nonsense. They're the ones with the anarchists, and they wear the black masks and all the black clothing so that they all blend in together. The so-called black bloc, not as a racial reference, but in reference to the clothing that they wear. And what these idiot moronic kids, most of them, not all of them are kids, because there's a lot of adults out there doing the exact same thing. There's a lot of adults feeding this. It comes from the SDS and these anti-Vietnam groups who have lost their luster, and they're longing for a conflict again, and so they've become educators, and now they're raising the next generation of social degenerate activists. But what they haven't seen, what these people don't realize, is when you've been through violence, the last thing you want is a violent society. That's the last thing you want to live in. These kids think they're doing some kind of justice. They think they're bringing down the system. And what they're really doing is, in their actions of targeting people and targeting innocent people, they're turning those people who could be their allies against them. They're forcing Americans now to make a choice. Okay, what am I more angry about? Am I more angry about the death of George Floyd, or am I more angry about the reaction to the death of George Floyd? And which one is more of an existential threat to my life right now? And I guarantee you that a lot of people are making the decision that the bigger threat to their life, the bigger threat to their way of life even, is the reaction to the death of George Floyd. And so a lot of people are now turning against what was and what began as a righteous movement, and really in what many respects is still a righteous movement. But when you start getting violent against the wrong targets, and when you start getting violent and lose the focus about why you're being violent, what's going to happen is you're going to get a violent response. And then when you get a violent response, you're going to have a violent retaliation. And when you have a violent retaliation, then the government is going to start clamping down. And the very government that you initially started protesting is now going to become so much more powerful that they're going to make it so much more oppressive. And we're starting to see that now. This has been going on for over a week now. Businesses being burned to the ground. And what has government response been? Has government response been, oh my gosh, we have to deal with these bad officers? No. The government response now is, oh my gosh, we have to deal with these bad protesters. And so now, instead of just dealing with uniformed police officers, we now have the military patrolling streets in some cities. Now, granted, it's National Guard troops. We are now becoming Fallujah. We are now becoming Afghanistan. And you've got these groups that are out there and they're destroying monuments and they're destroying historical locations and stuff. And I got questions about, I don't understand why you guys are out there protecting property. I don't understand why you're out there protecting the Alamo and all that kind of stuff. Let me tell you a little story. The older generations, and I'm not really including myself in this because I was like in my early teens and preteens when all this stuff started happening. But when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, one of the first things they did was destroy the culture of Afghanistan, the historical culture. Instead of just kind of changing the culture, but recognizing that there was a culture which was large. There was a lot of Buddhist and Hindi influence. So, you know, you had the big Buddhas and all that kind of stuff. What the Taliban did, the very first thing that it did when it took over was destroy the culture of Afghanistan and any reference to the past. They destroyed giant Buddha statues that had been there for hundreds of years. They destroyed cultural icons and erased the history of Afghanistan in favor of the Taliban. That is what the modern day, and I'm just going to say, because on this particular point, it's a leftist ideology, and it's more of a communist ideology. I'm not going to even put it squarely on the Democrats. It's a leftist communist ideology that you have to erase history so that you can recreate it in your own image, and that's communism. And so you've got these people out there trying to destroy things like the Alamo, trying to destroy Confederate monuments, trying to destroy historical monuments, historical figures, because of what they perceive as the mistakes of the past. And those people are no better than the Taliban. And if those people succeed in getting what they want, all we have to do is look at Afghanistan to see what the future of that mentality is going to bring us. It's going to bring the Taliban to the United States under the guise of communism or socialism or progressivism. And as somebody who's lived through violence and had to engage in violence, that is, I guarantee you that the future that a lot of these people are moving towards is not a future that you want. Violence is never good. Even when it's justified, it's never good. Ask anyone that has ever had to kill someone in self-defense, in combat, or even accidentally, what goes through their minds every single day. They think about that person whose life they took, even when that life that they took was justified in self-defense. Violence is destructive, even to people who justifiably engage in it. And so we should always try to avoid it. Now, that said, we should also be prepared for it. Not only prepared for violence, but be prepared to engage in violence in defense of violence, but as a last resort. Human beings are the smartest creatures on earth. We have brains, we've created roads, we've figured out how to grow food to sustain millions of people instead of having to worry about having our own gardens and our own food sources. We've sent people into space. We've created these institutions of higher learning that, of course, the same communists are trying to destroy because they're no longer higher learning. They're now mostly institutions of higher manipulation. But we are an intelligent race, and we should use those brains and come together, stop this fighting against white versus black and black versus white and black versus Hispanic and Hispanic versus white and Muslim versus Christian and Christian versus Jew and Jew versus Christian, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. And until we all start realizing that, we're going down a road, I'm telling you. And the reason I go to these protests armed, and the reason I try to encourage other people to do that, is to prevent the violence. Not to engage in it, but be prepared for it. Don't go there to start a fight, go there to stop a fight. That's the whole purpose of it. And I'm almost home. I hope that helped a little bit. And for those of you that support tearing down monuments, I hope you realize you're no better than the Taliban is in trying to destroy culture. Whether you agree with it or not, it's still a historical culture. And destroying historical monuments, even if it has nothing to do with racism, but like the Alamo has nothing to do with racism. Things like that. So there's my little Facebook Live for you. I don't know if it accomplished anything. I don't even know if I made any sense or not. But I wanted to pass on some words of wisdom as I drove home from my appointment, getting some injections. So, all right, where am I at here? How do I finish this? All right, y'all take care. Be safe. Be free.